Hey everyone, today we are making a Mille Crepes or crepe cake. This is almost a no-bake recipe. We're just going to use a trusty fry pan to fry really thin crepes, layer them up with a luscious chocolate cream. The crepe recipe on its own is fantastic, super versatile. Top it however you like if you're just making some nice thin pancakes. And for savory recipes, just leave out the vanilla. Let's make it. Now, to start, we're going to make our praline, so we need to preheat the oven, and we're just going to roast our hazelnuts. So I've got hazelnuts with their skin on. I don't mind the skin, it's a bit of extra fiber. I'm going to roast them in my preheated oven. So next up, we want the roasted hazelnuts on a tray, and we're going to make a dry caramel. So I normally use raw or golden caster sugar, but for caramels, I use a white sugar. This is because that tiny bit of the extra molasses content in a raw sugar will burn. So we start to make a dry caramel, we need a hot pan. So preheat it, and we're going to sprinkle in a spoon of sugar. And we want it to actually start to melt. And you'll see that it starts to become. So I'm also throwing in here on the tray a dried up used vanilla bean. It's an excellent, amazing way of adding flavor. And I'm also adding some salt. Now you see that sugar is starting to become clear and melt, and it's also starting to become golden around the edge. So as soon as it melts, we can add a bit more at a time. The more sugar that we have that's melted in the pan, the more sugar we can add. Now, if you're not confident doing this method, just add a third of the weight of the sugar in water and just cook it out until it caramelizes. It can be a bit smoky when you make a dry caramel. So I'm just adding a bit at a time, and my caramel is melting and starting to caramelize. And we're just swirling the pan, not stirring it. So with this nice golden, nice kind of dark golden sugar, I'm just pouring that over my nuts. So to get caramel out of a pan, just pour some hot water in and let it dissolve. Be very careful when cooking any caramel. Most of the times they reach temperatures of up to 200, almost 200 degrees. So just be really careful not to touch that. You could have a really serious burn. I'm going to leave this aside to cool. We've let our nuts and the caramel cool down. And I'm just going to break up the caramel into small pieces as I can. Otherwise, I don't want to damage my blender. So I'm just pouring everything into the food processor. Then we can just start pulsing. Now, you see we've got this beautiful golden color. That's from the skin and the really well toasted hazelnuts. Now, as this mixture blends, oils are going to start coming out. In a food processor or high-powered blender like a Thermomix or a Vitamix, it'll just start pulverizing and turn to liquid. But if you're using something like a NutriBullet for a smaller batch, that's totally fine. But you're just going to have to make sure you keep scraping down, opening and scraping down your container to make sure that we get some nice blending motion. So you can see we now have like a thick paste. We want to just keep blending it until it becomes quite liquid. And you'll notice that if you feel the bowl, it's going to be a little bit warm. So looking at our praline, we have a beautiful kind of golden glossy paste. It's quite liquid. So we've got our beautiful golden praline paste. You can store this in a glass jar. Just make sure you stir it very well before using, because there can be a natural separation of the oils and the solids over time. But this is best used and kept as fresh as possible, just to make sure that the flavor is in peak form, that the hazelnut is amazing, that we don't risk oxidation. So always make this in kind of smaller batches, maybe 250 grams of nuts at a time. I've heated the first portion of the milk in the microwave for a minute until it's about 60 degrees. We need to add, you can also do that on the stove, just bring it to a quick simmer and then take it off. And then we're adding our chocolate, our hazelnut praline. Look at that we've just made. It is fresh, it is potent, so incredibly delicious. And then also a little bit of coconut oil. And then I'm adding that milk that I've just heated up. Now we just want to let that sit for a minute to melt the chocolate and the coconut oil. So we can also do this in a larger blender, but I'm going to use a hand blender today. Blending that base is quite thick, but we want to blend it until it's a beautiful, thick and shiny, glossy emulsion. Kind of gets to a point where it doesn't want to move around the bowl as easily. And then we're adding our cold milk. You can see it now has like the consistency of a cream rather than a ganache. And excuse the mess, I'm just going to scrape down my bowl quickly just to get anything left on the sides. So if you follow this process, you end up with a cream that has a finished temperature of around 31 to 32 degrees. So we've almost like tempered it or pre-crystallized it, so that we're going to lock in that nice structure. It's going to let it whip into an amazing whipped ganache, chantilly type textured cream. We want to just pour it into a shallow tray. And this is important just for cooling, and we want to chill this over a few hours until it's really nice and cold and has a quite set texture. For things like this, where I'm cooling down a cream, I do always put a thin layer of cling wrap or bio cling film on top. This is just to prevent a skin from forming. Now put this in the fridge until it is set and nice and chilled for about at least 3 hours. To prepare our crepe batter, we're adding our flour, our sugar, salt, and then some olive oil. Vanilla extract or paste is optional. Definitely recommended in sweet recipes, but leave it out for savory ones. And then we're going to add the milk, but only half of it. So you could throw all this into a blender and you'd be done. I'm adding half of the liquids. I want the mixture to be a little bit thick while I'm mixing it. This will ensure that I don't have any lumps that I can't break away. And then we can add the rest of our milk and continue whisking that until it's nicely combined. So the key here is that we want a really nice liquid batter that's going to spread itself across the pan so that we don't need to. There we go. We can fry up our crepes. We just want to make sure that the base of our pan is the size of our cake tin so that we have nice even layers all the way across. I'm just going to pop this open, and I'm reusing some parchment paper for just setting that aside. So now we want to preheat our pan to a nice kind of a medium-high heat. Now I've got some extra virgin spray oil. You don't really need to use much or any spray oil, especially if you're using non-stick. But I'm going to do one for the first pan. And I always think that the first crepe, when you're making a lot of crepes, is like the sacrificial crepe. It's good for a chef's snack later on. We're going to pour some of our crepe batter all the way around, and we want enough crepe batter to coat the whole pan, but just in a nice thin layer. And your pan should be hot enough that as you swirl that batter around, it is kind of almost starting to cook. And within a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds, some bubbles start to appear. That's how you know it's ready. And the mixture will go from kind of off-white to a light golden color as it cooks through and starts steaming. Then you'll notice that it starts to pull away from the edges as it dries out. But I like to cook it a little bit longer, so in total we have about a minute on the stove, just so that we get some nice caramelization on the bottom of the crepe and it's kind of dried out enough, otherwise it can be a little bit claggy or sticky. So if you're brave, you can just gently peel it away from the pan. Gently lay it out onto a plate, like so. Alright, so we can now whip our chocolate cream. So you'll see it has a nice set texture, but this is going to soften up and turn into a whipped chocolate ganache or whipped cream. So just putting that into our bowl. We want our bowl to be chilled or at room temperature. And then I'm just going to whip it. You'll see it doesn't take very long at all for this to become, to take on like a whipped, slightly firm texture. We want that to have a beautiful kind of whipped and stable texture. We don't want to over whip it though, or it could become grainy and have a compromised texture. If you need to, you can always add a few splashes of milk just to make your cream a little bit softer, to make it a bit easier to spread and build your cake. And I'm just going to add this to a piping bag. You can always just spoon this into each layer and pallet it in, whichever way you prefer. I just like to have a tiny, to make it a little bit more consistent, I'll pipe our whipped cream inside and then spread it with a palette knife. Now to start building the cake, I'm just going to spray my tin with a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, and then pick a lovely, fully cooled crepe to line our tin. So we always want to start with a good one on the bottom, kind of well centered. Want to spend a little bit of time just, making sure it's nice and flat, well centered, because it is the one that you'll see on top of the cake. There we go. My cream in a piping bag, and just pipe a nice generous swoosh, and then use a little angled palette knife to gently spread that around. We don't want it to be too thick and definitely not too thin, but just a nice even layer all the way around. And you do need a little palette knife to be able to do that. So I'm just going to take a little teaspoon and drizzle a little bit around. It's just going to give an extra burst of incredible praline flavor. So that's about a teaspoon per layer. Then just going to go in with the next layer. Now we want to put this in the fridge for at least an hour or two. Now, to get this out as nicely as possible, I'm just going to low torch the edges just to release the cream. There we go. Now gently releasing, taking the tin out, and then there we go. So now I'm going to spread a nice thin layer of pure praline paste. It's about 2 kind of heaped teaspoons of pure praline paste, and then just using the palette knife to work it all the way almost out to the edge. I'm going to leave a little bit of space around the edges and decorate them. And then I've got some roasted hazelnuts that I'm placing around the edges as well. I'm also going to overlap them. You see that when you kind of roast a hazelnut with the skin on, you get this really lovely kind of really delicate skin that is nice. That makes a lovely decoration in hazelnut cakes or Paris-Brest and things like that. Just gives a little bit of lightness. So there we have our beautiful hazelnut praline crepe cake.